imagine, like that agonizing wait when someone you love vanishes. It's just awful.
Absolutely.
And you just cling to those statistics, right? 77% of missing adults are found in 24 hours,
Right.
87% within 2 days, and then only 3% missing longer than a week. But for the family of 25-year-old Stephanie Parze, that clock just kept ticking. So today we're diving deep into her tragic case. This story, it just gripped the nation back in 2019.
It really did.
And we're going to uncover, all those events leading up to Stephanie's disappearance. Look at that turbulent relationship she had with her boyfriend, John Osbilgen.
Right.
And try to unravel all those twists and turns
Yeah.
that ultimately led to a heartbreaking discovery.
This case, I think, was a stark reminder, really, of how
Yes.
domestic violence can hide, like right there in plain sight.
All right.
And how searching for a missing loved one could become just this desperate race against time. It's
Yeah.
riddled with legal hurdles.
Absolutely.
Digital roadblocks, Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start by getting to know Stephanie a little bit.
Mhm.
She wasn't just a face on a missing person poster. She was talented, a makeup artist, bright future ahead of her.
Yeah.
She loved cars, dreamed of having a family,
Mhm.
and shared just this incredibly close bond with her family.
A very tight-knit family.
They even had these annual rafting trips. Can you imagine that? A whole crew of loved ones,
Wow.
navigating the rapids together. They call themselves the Parze Pirates.
I love that. The Parze Pirates. It just really gives you that sense of how close they were, and how they always supported each other. And that really becomes a major factor in the search for Stephanie. That unwavering love, that fuel, a lot of these desperate searches.
Absolutely. So into Stephanie's life enters John Osbilgen. He was a stockbroker. Seemed charming, seemed successful.
Right.
However, Stephanie's father, Ed, he had this sense of unease about him right from the start.
Like a gut feeling.
Yeah, he saw those red flags right away.
And that's such a vital point. Parental intuition, right?
Yeah.
It can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And so often, those closest to the victim, they sense something's off.
Yeah.
Even if they can't quite put their finger on it.
It's true.
It's a reminder for all of us to trust those instincts.
Yeah.
And really listen, when loved ones express concerns.
Especially when it comes to relationships.
Exactly.
And there was one incident. On one of those family rafting trips, one of the Parze Pirates adventures, Ed falls out of the raft.
Oh, no.
And John, who was the closest to him, he just froze. He didn't react, didn't try to help.
Oh.
Someone else had to pull Ed back in.
Oh, my gosh.
And that just solidified Ed's doubts about John.
That's chilling. Maybe it was shock in the moment, but it also raises questions about John's character.
Yes.
And his capacity for empathy. Could this incident, seemingly small at the time, foreshadow like a much deeper coldness within him?
Right. And then things took a disturbing turn. Stephanie starts experiencing some unsettling events at home.
Okay, like what?
Well, there was a strange handprint on her mirror that she couldn't explain.
Ah.
And then her pet bird died suddenly
Oh.
for no apparent reason.
Oh, how awful.
And these incidents, they created this atmosphere of unease.
Right. Yes. Was this just a series of unfortunate coincidences, or was there something more sinister happening?
Right. You start to feel that psychological suspense.
Yes.
And it just adds to the fear
Absolutely.
and uncertainty in an already troubled relationship. And then one terrifying night in August, Stephanie calls her parents. She's panicked. And her father, Ed, rushes over to her house. And he finds her running barefoot through the woods, covered in blood.
Oh, my God.
And she told him that John attacked her.
This is just awful. Now we're moving from those unsettling occurrences to outright violence. It makes you think of her fleeing for her life, Just heartbreaking.
And sadly, it wasn't an isolated incident. Weeks earlier, Stephanie had showed her father this mark. She'd cleverly concealed it with makeup.
Oh, wow.
And she claimed she got it roughhousing with John.
See, that's a classic tactic.
Is it?
Yeah, abusers downplaying the violence, making excuses, gaslighting the victim into believing it wasn't that bad.
Oh, wow.
Or that it was somehow their fault. It's important to recognize these patterns and understand how insidious domestic abuse is. It can be really subtle in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then escalate over time. You have to pay attention to those early signs.
And later that month, Stephanie was hospitalized with pneumonia.
Oh, no.
And her condition was worsened, unfortunately, by her asthma and vaping habit.
Mm-hmm.
But while she's vulnerable and in the hospital, John swoops in,
Mm-hmm.
starts showering her with attention and gifts and affection.
Love bombing.
Yeah, is that what that is?
It's a common tactic in abusive relationships. It's all about manipulation, making the victim feel loved, indebted,
Oh, wow.
and it makes it even harder to break free from that cycle of abuse.
And John, he even managed to convince the hospital staff to let him stay overnight with Stephanie.
Wow. You know, on the surface, it seems caring,
Right.
but it really reveals, like, a controlling, manipulative behavior underneath.
Yeah. And despite the abuse, Stephanie seemed conflicted in her feelings.
Yeah.
She filed a domestic violence report against him.
Good for her.
But then a few weeks later, she posts this video on Facebook of him romantically asking her to be his girlfriend.
It's so complicated. It really shows the complexity of these relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Victims often experience this push and pull, right? Between fear and this desire to believe that their partner can change. It can be so hard to break free.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember that victims, they make decisions based on a whole mix of emotions and circumstances.
And on Halloween night, 2019, Stephanie went to a comedy show with her mom and sisters.
Huh.
Seems like a normal evening, right?
Right. Sounds fun.
Laughter. Family time.
Yep.
And this was the last time that anyone saw Stephanie alive. Her mom had asked her to text when she got home, but that message never arrived.
So that becomes a pivotal moment in the investigation then.
Yes.
It sets the timeline.
Yeah.
And marks the beginning of the unknown. The fact that Stephanie didn't text, which she normally did, that immediately raises concerns.
Right. And the next morning, Stephanie didn't show up for her nanny job. So her worried family, they couldn't reach her, so they drive to her house.
Oh, no.
And what they find is unsettling, to say the least. The
Right.
lights were on in her house, even the attic light, which was unusual. Her dog was locked in the bathroom,
Wow.
but Stephanie was nowhere to be found.
So she's gone.
Her car was in the driveway. Her phone and keys were tucked deep into the couch cushions.
This is confusing. If Stephanie left willingly, why were her belongings left behind? Like, it doesn't add up.
Right. Desperate for answers, Stephanie's sister Brianna logs into Stephanie's Facebook account, hoping to find some clue as to her whereabouts. Instead, she finds a series of messages from John, sent the night before.
So social media becomes a key part of the investigation.
Yes, it often does. Sometimes it reveals crucial details about relationships and potential motives.
Right.
The messages, they started out normal enough, but quickly escalated into angry, expletive-filled rants from John. Brianna messaged John directly. And he claimed he had seen Stephanie the night before. Even slept over at her house.
Yeah.
Said he left that morning before Stephanie woke up and hadn't heard from her since.
Okay, so now John's alibi becomes a key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Right. Investigators are going to need to verify his story, look for inconsistencies, evidence that contradicts his account. His claim of not knowing Stephanie's whereabouts is now under scrutiny.
Absolutely. And with no sign of Stephanie and growing concerns about John's involvement, her family files a missing persons report. And that officially engages law enforcement in the search.
So this triggers that wider investigation, right? You've got search teams, forensic analysis. They'll do a deep dive into the lives of both Stephanie and John. Every detail now becomes a clue. And there's that mounting pressure to find Stephanie before it's too late.
And investigators zeroed in on 2 cell phones they believed could hold vital information, but they didn't have the passcodes.
Oh.
So they turned to Apple for help. But the company refused, citing privacy concerns.
Right. This is the ongoing clash between law enforcement and tech companies.
Yes.
Over data access. It raises a lot of complex questions about, privacy versus the need to solve crimes. And this tension would continue to play out throughout the investigation.
And forced to find alternative methods, the police turned to hackers.
Oh, wow.
Costly and time-consuming process.
It is.
Meanwhile, the investigation took a dramatic turn. While searching John's phone for evidence related to Stephanie's disappearance, they found child pornography.
Wow. So this discovery really changes everything. It reveals a whole other side to John. But it also gives law enforcement a reason to arrest him. However, the arrest was solely on charges related to the child pornography, not Stephanie's disappearance, even though he was named a person of interest in the case.
And prosecutors, they fought to keep John in custody. They argued he was a danger. And they highlighted his history of violence against women.
Remember that domestic violence report Stephanie filed? Well, it turned out she wasn't the only woman who had accused John of abuse.
Oh gosh, so this pattern of behavior is really concerning. It suggests a a tendency towards violence and control, and that's sadly a pattern we see in a lot of domestic violence cases. But these reports, as disturbing as they are, could help build the case against John in connection to Stephanie's disappearance.
Right. And one report detailed an incident where John grabbed a woman by the face, pulled her hair, dragged her by her head. She was injured. But like many victims of abuse, she dropped the charges a few weeks later. That's so common, unfortunately. Victims often recant their statements because of fear, pressure from the abuser, or maybe even that hope that their partner will change. It's a vicious cycle that makes prosecuting these cases really difficult.
It's heartbreaking. And Stephanie herself had reported John to the police months earlier. In June of 2019, he hit her, injured her hand and thumb.
So there's that pattern of escalating abuse.
Yeah.
And it's so important to notice it often starts with these minor incidents and then progresses to more serious violence. Investigators and potential victims need to be aware of this.
Absolutely.
And despite all that, the arguments, the evidence against him, John was released on bail.
Oh, wow.
After only 11 days.
What?
The judge said that he couldn't consider John's possible connection to Stephanie's disappearance
Oh, my God.
when making his decision.
Really?
Yeah, it was a legal technicality that just, sparked outrage and despair for Stephanie's family.
That's devastating, especially after uncovering those, previous reports of violence. It feels like the system failed to protect her, even with all those warning signs.
Yeah.
Did her family give up hope at that point?
Absolutely not. They refused to give up. They organized over 60 search parties, rallying their community and just tirelessly combing through those areas where they thought Stephanie might be.
Wow, that's...
Yeah, their determination was truly remarkable.
60.
Yeah, it's a testament to the power of love and hope, even in the face of such adversity.
As each day turned into weeks, the odds of finding Stephanie safe just dwindled.
Yeah.
Remember those statistics we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The longer someone is missing, the less likely they are to be found alive. And then just 3 days after John's release, a body was found in the same area where those search parties had been looking for Stephanie.
Oh, gosh. So that must have brought a mix of hope and dread, right?
Right.
Had they finally found Stephanie? Was this the break in the case? The tension must have been just unbearable waiting for that identification.
And it was a crushing blow when the news came. The body wasn't Stephanie's. It was John. He had taken his own life just days after being released.
Wow. So another layer added to the case,
Yeah.
It's a tragic end for John, but it raises questions about what he knew and what secrets he might have taken with him. Did he leave any clues behind that could lead to Stephanie?
It almost seems like an admission of guilt to me. But was there anything concrete did he confess?
Well, he left behind 2 suicide notes.
Okay.
One addressed to an ex-girlfriend, and it was filled with blame towards Stephanie, painting her as the source of all his problems. The other was to his parents, and while he admitted to some, unspecified truths, he very strongly denied those child pornography charges.
Even in death, he's trying to control the narrative,
Yeah.
Blaming Stephanie and denying the charges when there's evidence, it's just infuriating. Was there anything in those notes that could help find Stephanie?
Well, there was one line in that note to his ex-girlfriend that kind of jumps out. He wrote, "Look at the mess that I created." It's not a confession exactly, but it does seem to acknowledge that he left behind a lot of destruction.
Almost like he's acknowledging the chaos, but not taking responsibility. So did his suicide bring the investigation to a halt?
Well, while John's death was a setback, the search for Stephanie continued. Her family never gave up, and law enforcement remained committed. Sadly, it wasn't until months later in January of 2020 that their search came to an end.
Oh, no.
Yeah, 2 teenagers walking along a road in Old Bridge, New Jersey, about 13 miles from where Stephanie lived, made a horrible discovery. They found her body.
After months of agonizing uncertainty, her family finally had the answer they had been dreading. So what did authorities say about her cause of death?
Well, because of the decomposition, a definite cause of death couldn't be determined. However, based on the evidence, prosecutors theorized that Stephanie died during a sexual encounter with John that involved him choking her. They called it rough sex gone wrong.
Rough sex. That sounds like a way to downplay what could be dangerous and deadly behavior.
You're right to question that term. Rough sex can definitely be a way to disguise violence and abuse in this case, though investigators believe that what happened to Stephanie went way beyond anything consensual. It was a violent act.
So even though John was dead, the investigation wasn't over. Were there still questions?
Exactly. Months after Stephanie's funeral, the investigation took another turn.
Okay.
John's parents came under scrutiny.
Really?
Yeah, investigators suspected they knew more than they had said, possibly even withheld evidence.
This is giving me Brian Laundrie vibes,
Yeah.
where his parents were suspected of knowing more about his involvement with Gabby Petito's disappearance. What made investigators suspect John's parents?
Well, they believed that there were text messages between John and his parents, potentially, including a confession from John about Stephanie, and there were also suspicions of a third suicide note that his parents never gave to the police.
Wow, that's disturbing, suggesting a deliberate attempt to protect their son even after his death, possibly obstructing the investigation and preventing Stephanie's family from getting the truth.
Yeah, John's father denied his son's involvement in Stephanie's disappearance, claimed that the suicide was solely because of those child pornography charges. He even admitted to withholding passwords to some of his devices from the police because he didn't trust them and blamed them for his son's death.
It's just a pattern of denial and deflection that can be so frustrating when you're just seeking justice.
Yeah.
This need to protect their son's image, even with these accusations.
Yeah.
It's tragic. Did that lack of cooperation bring the investigation to a halt?
Well, while the investigation faced challenges, it did bring to light the complexities of domestic violence, digital privacy, and, the legal battles families go through in their search for truth and justice. It also really highlighted the strength and resilience of Stephanie's family.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to hear that even in the face of such a tragedy, they found a way to channel their grief into something positive. Tell me more about the foundation they established.
Well, in honor of Stephanie, her family started the Stephanie Nicole Parze Foundation
Okay.
to combat domestic violence and to support families of missing persons.
Wow.
It's a powerful testament to their commitment to turning their pain into something good.
What a beautiful way to honor Stephanie's memory and to try to prevent other families from going through this same heartache. What kind of work does the foundation do?
They do a lot. They offer a range of services from educating adults and children about domestic violence to providing self-defense classes, peer counseling, and even an escort service for victims who have to go to court hearings or custody exchanges and don't feel safe going alone. They're also advocating for Stephanie's Law, which would create a public domestic violence registry.
A public registry for domestic violence offenders? That could be a game changer. Just like the sex offender registry, it would make crucial information accessible, and maybe prevent future tragedies by letting people know if someone they're involved with has a history of violence.
Right.
It's a powerful legacy for Stephanie and a testament to her family's dedication to creating a safer world.
Right.
It's just incredible how Stephanie's family has managed to channel their grief into like this real force for change. They've taken this personal tragedy and turned it into a mission to help others.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks volumes,
It does.
about their strength and resilience.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's light.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best way to heal is by helping others.
I love that Stephanie's case, though, brought to light so many critical issues.
It did.
From like the hidden nature of domestic violence to
Right.
like, digital privacy and investigations. It also, showed us those legal battles that families often face when they're just looking for justice.
Yeah.
What are some of the, I guess, like the biggest takeaways you see emerging from all of this?
I think for me, this case really underscores how important it is to recognize those like subtle signs of abuse.
Yeah.
It often starts subtly with like emotional manipulation and control, before it escalates to like physical violence.
Right.
And we need to like educate ourselves in our communities about these red flags, encourage people to talk openly and support victims so they can come forward and seek help.
It's true. It's so easy to just get caught up in the headlines,
Right.
and those shocking details. But we have to remember, behind every story, there's a real person,
A real family.
a family whose lives are shattered.
Absolutely.
What can we learn from Stephanie's story about like how to actually support victims and their families?
I think Stephanie's case is a powerful reminder that we need empathy and understanding. Victims of domestic violence, they often face judgment, blame, which makes it even harder to break free.
Of course.
We need to create a culture of support.
Yeah.
So victims feel safe coming forward, sharing their stories, getting help without being, shamed.
Absolutely. And beyond supporting victims, we have to hold abusers accountable
Yes.
for their actions.
100%.
The legal system, I think, needs to be more responsive
Yeah.
to these cases,
Yes.
making sure that those perpetrators face real consequences,
Yeah.
and that victims are protected.
Yeah, you're right. We need legal reforms to address these, these challenges of prosecuting domestic violence.
Yeah,
We also need to invest in resources for law enforcement.
absolutely.
Give them the training and the tools
Yeah.
to investigate these crimes effectively and support victims.
And this whole issue of digital privacy and law enforcement access to data,
Right.
it's a complex part of this story too.
It is.
This debate isn't going away anytime soon. How do we strike that balance,
Right.
between privacy and the need to solve these crimes?
It's tough. There are no easy answers, but we have to find ways to protect privacy while also making sure law enforcement can investigate serious crimes, like domestic violence.
Right.
Maybe there's a system where you can access encrypted data, but only on a case-by-case basis
Okay.
with strict judicial oversight to prevent abuse.
I like that. It seems like technology is always one step ahead of the law.
Yeah.
And we got to keep having these conversations
We do.
to make sure we're using it responsibly to protect people
Yes.
and to hold those who harm others accountable.
I agree. And it's not just about, laws and technology. It's about creating a culture where domestic violence is just not okay. We need to challenge those social norms that allow abuse to happen,
Yeah.
promote healthy relationships,
Yeah.
empower people to speak out against violence.
Stephanie's case, I think, reminds us that this can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter, your age, your background.
Your income?
It's everywhere.
It's pervasive.
And we need to address it as a society.
Absolutely.
And it starts with awareness, education, a commitment to, actually creating a safer world.
Well said.
Everyone.
We can all do our part.
Yeah.
Whether it's by supporting organizations like, the Stephanie Nicole Parze Foundation, or just educating ourselves and others about the warning signs, or even just speaking up when we see something that's wrong.
Yes.
Silence only protects abusers.
That's so true.
We need to be the voice for those who can't speak up.
Stephanie's story, it's a powerful reminder of the impact of domestic violence and how badly we need change.
It is.
Her legacy lives on, in the work that her family is doing.
It does.
And their dedication is an inspiration to all of us.
Absolutely. They have turned this unimaginable loss into a force for good.
Yeah.
And their commitment to helping others, it's just a testament to the power of love and hope.
I love that for those of you listening, please visit the Stephanie Nicole Parze Foundation website.
Yes.
You can learn more about their work, how to get involved. Even small actions can make a big difference.
They can.
In this fight.
They can.
Remember, you're not alone.
Yeah.
There are resources available.
There are.
And people who care. And together we can create a world
Yes.
where everyone feels safe and supported.